This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. Today is such an exciting episode. It is our first interview by guest host Lisette Austin, and you are going to love this conversation between two adoptee friends. Lisette interviews her close, lifelong friend, Iana, who helped Lisette find her birth father using genetic genealogy. Iana shares her adoption and reunion story and what's led her to come out of the fog and begin exploring adoptee issues. She also shares what led her to become interested in genealogy, the importance of having a close adoptee friend, and what her top adoptee resources are. Together, Lisette and Iana share some of the story behind their detective hunt, including a few of their favorite highlights. They wrap up with some recommended resources for you, and everything we mentioned today will be on the website adopteeson.com. I'm feeling especially thankful for our guest Iana today because Iana introduced Lisette to Adoptees On. So this feels like a full circle moment, but they'll tell us that story a little later on in the show. Let's listen in.
Well, I am so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Iana. Welcome, Iana.
Hello, thanks for having me.
This is fun. I feel like we're in some sort of weird reality in which we are on this show together. I don't even know how this has actually come to be, but here we are, and I'm so excited to hear your story.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right, so why don't you go ahead? We'll just kick it off with you sharing some of your story with us.
So I was born in 1969 and adopted, typical closed adoption of that time period, and was adopted pretty much at birth, and had actually a pretty happy childhood. There were 2 adopted kids and 2 biological kids, which for me just I think worked well. My sister is also adopted, and so she and I had that in common, and we're close with that through that experience. Now, from my perspective, she might say differently, but the kids in the family, if you know them, my brothers definitely look like my parents. But if you don't really know us, we're all actually kind of different looking from each other, different, hair colors and so on. So I think a lot of people didn't really know, wouldn't have guessed. And who was adopted and who wasn't. And, it never really came up. In fact, it was kind of funny. I often got told that my sister and I looked alike, which, and my sister, to me, we don't look anything alike.
Yeah, I would agree.
But, in fact, I don't think we do, but we're the same height, the same build-ish and so on. Anyway, so for me, that wasn't obvious. We were kind of our own little clan, and, it was really only till later that I realized that I don't have a big family. I felt like I did because we had the small family, our little nucleus, but I only have 4 other cousins. So, in fact, we didn't really, we just didn't have a lot of extra family around. The adoption just didn't come up in that way. But in any case, my parents were really great, and all that was good. I think I had some typical issues that adoptees have. But in general, I think I was pretty well adjusted. I did, however, think quite a lot about where I came from, who my parents were, my birth parents. And while I was very defensive for my adoptive parents, we got that usual question, who are your real parents? Who's your real mom? And I would always be very defensive about that. But then also just felt very wistful about my birth parents and definitely wanted to know who they were. And it got stronger and stronger in my teen years. And at 18, I was kind of waiting for that time when I could potentially do that. I did get some information when I was 16. I got 2 sheets of paper with identifying information, quite a lot, actually. Not as much about my birth parents, but each sibling that they had was detailed at that time, the time of my adoption. And so I thought that was interesting. All the first names in the families, hair color, eye color, nationality, kind of what they were doing even. But so that was pretty amazing. I love that. But when I hit 18, I went through the struggle of trying to figure out if I was going to do that, if I was going to pursue finding them. And ultimately, actually decided not to. I just felt just too scared. I just felt like I couldn't handle it. And I had a couple friends who were adopted, and we all talked about it. At that time, I was in college when I really started to think about it. Anyway, I decided at that point to wait. And then I shelved it. And I still thought a lot about it and always wondered, but just kind of put it on a shelf somewhere. And then I had kids, and that was, kind of consumed me. All the focus became them, of course. And I kind of feel like I drifted away from the idea of even finding my birth parents. But definitely had some thoughts around, when I did have birth kids, I think I had some strong feelings then about what it would be like to give up a child, and thought about it in those terms. But anyway, I really didn't want to pursue it. I kind of just made that decision and stuck with it. However, I started catching wind in Seattle that Washington was going to be opening up the records. And that was about like 2013, 14. I can't remember exactly, but I remember each time I would come home, because I wasn't living there at the time, I would hear a story or read a news article. And finally, the records opened. And at that point, I think I waited a whole year still. But at that point, I felt like, oh, I could get my hands on my birth certificate. And somehow it also felt like legally I could do it. Not that I had, not that I felt like I couldn't pursue that if I wanted to, but just somehow I felt like if my birth parents really, I don't know, somehow that letting that go, becoming legal was really important. And I just felt like, well, now I have this extra reason that I can pursue it. So that's when I decided to go ahead, and I officially sent away for it and received that birth certificate, which was something else. And my birth mother's name, was there. And I sort of hesitated for a minute. I received it, opened it, looked at it, hesitated. And then I went to my computer and I typed in that name, and it was crazy. Immediately I found her because she had kept her maiden name. So I think maybe there was like one or two other people with that same name. There was a tip from the birth certificate. Actually, I don't think there was a tip. I'm not sure how it happened, to be honest, because I remember just pulling it up. And I think what happened is I pressed on her picture, because there was a picture, and it was like I knew it was her. And then I think I must have done some background Googling to figure out that it was probably her. So I spent the next month working on a letter, decided to write her a handwritten letter. I knew where she was, but I wasn't totally sure. So I spent some time trying to figure that out. In the meantime, I also mapped out the entire family trees.
Of course.
And this was pre-Ancestry, but, it was really fun to just take all of my resources that I had and Google and Facebook, and even just, just tracing people from whatever I could find. And so by the time I got to, but I felt comfortable by that point, and then I sent off a letter, and then immediately heard back. So, and then ensued my reunion, which is a whole story in and of itself. But I remember thinking before I decided to get my birth certificate, and as I was trying to decide what to do, and I would talk to friends, and I remember I would always say, this is the most important thing in my life, and it's the least important. Least important meaning I've had a life, I have a family. Luckily, I have a family that I love, and parents who, I got along with and get along with. and that's my life. And I don't know anything else. And so I couldn't even conceive, right? I couldn't conceive of those other people. And so in some ways, did it matter? I don't know. I certainly could have lived my life not knowing. But of course, on the other hand, it is to me the most important thing. Where do we come from? Who were these people? What happened? Everything. And so, after I, went through the reuniting and the reunion with both my birth parents, it's kind of both. It's still kind of both. It's like, I mean, it's definitely now moved into, it is important. It's not that it's not important, but I still have my family. I still have my life. And so kind of trying to meld the two, I think that's what I'm working on right now.
Yes.
That's a little bit about my story.
Well, and it's great to hear it. Thanks for sharing all of that. It's great to hear it as someone who knows you really well. And I'm like, oh, I know all this stuff. And then you said a few things. I'm like, oh, really? Is that why that happened? Or that's when that started? Oh, that would explain something, I didn't realize it was when it was kind of triggered by the records opening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I wasn't paying as much attention to that in Washington State because at that point I already knew part of my, I knew I knew my birth mother's name and all that, having found her with an intermediary. So I kind of glossed that over. But I do know for other people, like one of my brothers, that's what triggered him to look. And so I forgot that you also, that was kind of the moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and there were times I remember in my adulthood, 20s and 30s, where I would stop and say, I don't know if you did this, but I would stop and say, oh, wait a minute, she's 40. Oh, wait a minute, she's 50.
Yes.
And I had kind of stopped doing that. Again, when I had kids and got super busy, I just got further away from it. But I remember thinking, oh, she's in her 60s now. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know if he's alive. Who knows? And so that really got to me too, is letting that time go by. And also thinking back at when I was, 18, 20, how young they were at that time. And thinking, it's all, it's just kind of time warp, a lot of time warp happening. And suddenly realizing I wanted to do that.
And it's interesting for me. So we've been friends since we were, I don't even know. It was 6th grade.
Yeah.
I think we met at school.
And our parents had known each other.
Yes. Our adoptive parents, our dads worked together.
Yeah.
Or worked at the same university, kind of in the same department almost-ish.
Yeah, they were connected through colleagues.
They were connected. Yeah. So, which, funny enough, I just have to say it out loud, that the man who arranged my adoption, or who was my birth mother's therapist, who knew my adoptive dad, also knew your dad. So it's just this weird.
It all gets weird.
It's like it gets really weird, but you would think that therefore we would have been talking about this all along. But I don't recall. We weren't like, oh, hey, this is this really intense connection we could have about both being adopted, kind of in the same circle. It's more like, oh, we're making friends at school. We went to the same school and we hit it off as far as I recall. But I do think there was also this obvious extra thread of our parents knowing each other, because then there were extra invites, I feel like, to your, to family events and things like that, right?
I do think that what I felt is that's definitely, for me, something that drew us together, you and I. And I can't remember, I can't remember the actual, I don't have the actual memories of being a kid, but I just know that was certainly something unique about our relationship.
Yes.
Is that we were both adopted. And so, we had that thing. And as I've gone through my life, I know a lot of adopted people. And so I think sometimes we're drawn to each other. Mm-hmm. But then I also wondered today, I was thinking about also just the way that, remember how we used to love fantasy, and your dad had those great comic books. And sometimes I hear that a lot of adopted kids like fantasy and kind of get into that. Anyway, it's sort of the magical realm.
Yeah. And my parents were kind of woo-woo in the 70s. I don't know. There was some interesting stuff going on just in terms of like, my dad was doing biofeedback, and he liked all these interesting books. And I just remember that we had a lot of fun. I remember that. I remember loving your family because it was so much, being an only child, you having 3 siblings was like, wow, like we could play a softball game on the beach because there's enough people here. So like it was very exciting for me to spend time with you and your family. But I do think you and your sister being adopted definitely helped normalize for me.
Yeah.
It was just one of those things like, oh, sometimes people are adopted and sometimes they aren't, whatever.
Do you remember many other kids? Because I was trying to think. I actually don't know that I knew many other kids who were adopted at that time.
I don't think I did either.
So I think that you that was important to me for sure. Yeah.
It probably was to me too. I don't know. It's hard to reach back into my brain and be like 11 and say like, was I thinking about that? But I do think we talked about it. And I knew your sister was also adopted. And I just kind of, it was just always something I knew. And I think it was comforting at some level. But it wasn't like we spent time together, for example. I don't remember us sitting around going, I wonder what your birth mother's like. Or, we didn't talk like that. Or like, I'm really upset because I'm adopted. I don't remember us having that conversation.
We were actually both the type of adoptee who were, I don't know if you would use the word defensive, but we were actually, while being very positive towards our birth parents in general, we were very kind of content, I think, at that time.
Yes, we were the happy adoptee. We were the ones who were like, it's all good. It all worked out. It's just so fine. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. And we were both kind of people pleaser, kid pleaser types.
Yeah, I would say that.
In the sense that we were affectionate and loving towards our parents and sort of, I don't know. But you're right. We did. I don't remember talking too much about it. It was more just in the background.
Yeah, it was in the background, but it was there. And I do also remember a funny thing as I sit here on the mic. This is not really related to adoption at all, but you and I used to love recording into tapes and pretend I was a radio host. And the first time I ever recorded a podcast episode for my other podcast, I had a flashback to you and I, like in my basement or something, going like, hello and welcome to the show, Iana and Lisette today. So anyway, so here we are.
What a surprise. Here we are.
Here we are. Oh my. So at any rate, okay. So at that point, we're adopted friends. It's interesting because then we did a kind of leapfrogging thing where it did start to become important to each of us in different ways for different reasons. But I still would say we're not talking about it as it's happening to us. Although I do vaguely remember telling you when I contacted my birth mother a long time ago, 22 years ago, and that I feel like you were one of the people I talked to about it because I almost feel like you referred me to your sister. And we're not going to get into your sister's story because that's her business. But I will just say we must have talked because I remember you saying, my sister's done some reunion or something, so you might want to talk to her.
And I know that prior to that, I had sort of closed the door. So I had closed the door in the sense of, I'm not going to do this. A few years later, you decided to open the door and so, leapfrog. Yeah, you're right.
So we leapfrogged. So you were like, nope, I didn't really realize that you had this period of time in which I definitely personally myself at that age was not thinking about finding anybody, didn't care, didn't even think about it, was having all kinds of issues myself, 16, 17, 18, 19, all of that. Meanwhile, come to find out today that you're like marinating on that, but then you decide not to. Then I get advice from a doctor who's like, you really should know your medical history. And she kind of keeps prodding me. So I decide to, but not from a place of like, I really want to know this. It's more like, I guess she has a point. I think I found it. I think there was a woman who had given up a son and I met her and she was telling me all about how she'd gotten tired of waiting for him to find her and she was going to go find him. And I was like, oh, maybe someone's waiting for me to find them. And it never occurred to me. So this is what launched me into this. And so, I think I reached out to you. So obviously I'm thinking, well, Iana's adopted, and so, and her sister is. So you give me the advice. I talk to your sister. I have my 10-second reunion or whatever moment with my birth mother at that point. And so my door closes at the time. And so anyway, then I'm kind of keeping it closed. I meet a brother, though, in 2011. Then I go quiet again. I don't remember talking to you much about it at that point. Maybe you do. Do you remember me finding my brother? I don't know.
Now,
the brother in 2011, I decide
Yes.
Okay, I think I might have talked to you about it then. I'm just trying to paint this picture. Like, I think we would reach out to each other.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a few years after that, then I'm kind of go quiet because I'm not trying to find anybody else. I decide to communicate with my birth mother's son, my brother, and then we're just having our own little thing going on quietly.
Yep.
And then you do this big thing. And I'm trying to remember, like, where was I?
Well, do you remember, I'm sure we talked, but
we must have talked.
Yeah. I don't remember how much, or because all this time I've been living in a different city. So from you.
That's right. You had moved away, and we've been not in the same city for a long time. And I know we were both really busy parenting. Our kids would have been, whatever, like 10, 12, 14, somewhere in there. And so there's a lot going on. But I did know at some point you caught me up. And I remember being like, whoa, that's pretty wild. And all of this is leading into my next question because I feel like, again, the leapfrogging. Because at that point, when you're doing that and you're reuniting and you're doing your searching and you're doing all this stuff, I'm not engaged at this point in any of this. And the way I remember it is that I catch that you're doing it, but I'm not, I'm just like, oh, good for you, probably. Whatever, good on you. But then you start at some point, I think it must obviously be after you reunited, you're sending me things. This is what I remember. I remember that suddenly you're kind of bringing up the adoption stuff and in a way that you hadn't before, You're sending me tidbits. You're sending me information. And I'm not looking at this point.
Did it have to do with Ancestry?
Okay, good point. I had joined Ancestry and in 2016, and I probably told you that. And I think you were like, oh, hey, by the way, you know what?
Yes,
that stuff is legit because by then you had already found them. And then you submitted DNA?
So what happened is when I found them, it's kind of funny to think of because I kind of forgot that I hadn't used Ancestry to do any of this. What I had, though, is I got onto Genie or one of these other sites, and somebody in my birth family, one of my birth cousins, had put up a tree. And so there was this massive tree, and that was one of the things I was able to use because I knew some of the names. And so then I got on Ancestry, and what's funny is after I got on Ancestry, my birth mom got on Ancestry, and then later my birth father got on Ancestry. I waited a year to contact him, though, after I had contact. I took it some time. And so, to be honest, I don't think he questioned his paternity, but I think it was just this way for him to kind of double check, like,
right.
For real, like, is this for real? And so when I got on Ancestry, then I was kind of getting into all of the genealogy and all of just learning where I came from and way back and doing all that. And so I think I was probably sending you things, being excited about that. And kind of also, I think one of the main things about Ancestry and all of those sites that's so great is that we get to find things out on our own about our origins. So I was getting pretty excited, and I don't know what was happening with you, but I probably wanted you to. I was probably wanting to like share that with you and do things with you. So,
well, what I remember, and let me just also back up a second. So just, we've obviously established that we've known each other a very, very long time. We've mentioned that you had moved away, but we're kind of these friends that we were close as young people, and then like high school, whatever, we were in slightly different groups, but we were always still friends. And then I kind of went off my rocker and ran away, like drama. Like I was the happy adoptee with massive issues that I did not connect to being an adoptee at that time. But anyway, went off my rocker. But I remember we like kind of reconnected, like I got healthier. We reconnected in our early 20s. And then you went to college and I was in college and then whatever. But we always had this really good connection. Like you were just one of those people that I could not talk to you for like a year or two even. And then pick up the phone and it's like, no time's gone by. We don't have to waste any time. We're just right back where we started. And so I think that's important to mention. Like we were actually, I would consider you one of my closest friends. Like you're just really tight, even if we don't talk all the time. So I remember we're at this point, we're checking in about kids. Like when our kids were born, that was a thing. And, then you moved away. We went to visit you guys and, so we'd been in touch. But, again, adoptee issues was not usually part of this. There were a lot of other things we were talking about.
Yeah.
So the way I remember it is probably I was sharing with you, my excitement about whatever, just travel and this and that and the other thing. Because at that point I had all these miles and points, and I feel like I mentioned I did Ancestry. On the other hand, I sort of suspect and have this nagging memory that you might have told me to do Ancestry.
I might.
As an adoptee, actually. And that I've turned that story into, oh no, I was doing it because I want to travel to the places where I want to find out my African, whatever. But I think you might have been like, yeah, but you also can like match with people. I'm like, oh, whatever. Actually, this is a great idea because can't you see your African ancestry? Like I'm not really paying attention,
Yeah.
And
yeah, I kind of have that memory too because I got on in 2015, the end of it, and I don't remember I just remember through time kind of discussing your birth dad and the kind of the question of all that. And then sort of, I think I started to think about, well, we should be able to figure this out. I mean, or Lisette could, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and to think back, when you start on Ancestry, unless you're a genealogist, you really don't know the power of it and all that it can do. So I think it makes sense that at that time, we're just sort of starting to think like, oh, wait a minute now.
Well, I mean, it was you were thinking that. I think you were thinking that because I remember it that you were encouraging me. You were encouraging me, encouraging me. So I would get on, and then there were a lot of things going on in my life, teenage son, whatever, and so I would kind of get on there, look at stuff. And I also remember that the whole genealogy thing is like, as a field, is kind of blowing up. Like it's a newer thing, and it's like, like you said, a lot of people are kind of learning all together. People have been doing it for a while before this, but I feel like things were picking up steam around that time. But anyway, so I get on, and the way I remember it is that I'm noticing, or you're encouraging me to notice that there are cousins I match to, Black people that are my cousins, and that you're pointing out to me, these people are related to you, right? And I'm saying, what? And you're explaining to me that you had a cousin, you knew that it was accurate because you had found this is when I really get it in my head that you actually are in this real reunion. This is when it really registers for me because you're saying, no, I was able to confirm with so-and-so that this person is my second cousin and they're right there in the matches. And I think it finally hit me like, oh,
yes.
Are you serious? Like, this is legit? Like, these people really are my cousins? And then I still didn't really know what to do with it. But I'm honestly like, credit you with kind of keeping at me. Like, you just kind of, why don't you just reach out to one of them, you'd say. And anyway, so
it was a delicious mystery that was right at our fingertips.
And so off we went. And I'd say by the time 2018 or 2019, I think it was 2018. By now, for sure, you've sent me some stuff like, oh, let's say one particular podcast that I really found interesting called Adoptees On.
Ooh.
Ever heard of that? So that was sent to me by you. I remember binge listening to a bunch of things on there, and it was like my brain started opening, like just this portal in my head was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I remember finding this podcast and was just like, just to hear all the stories. And when did our other favorite podcast, Cut Off Genes, come in?
Right. So
that came in at some point.
Yeah, because I remember it was like 2018. You're sending me tidbits. You sent me the particular video that really blew my mind because I make no bones about it. I've had substance abuse issues in the past. I'm a long time off of that stuff, like years, decades, 30 years. But you sent me something, Paul Sunderland video and addiction.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, hold on a second. That really, I was like, okay, now I'm absolutely believe relinquishment mattered. Yeah. And that was like end of 2018 or into 2019. And then that got me into actually starting to go to like adoptee support groups. Like that's when I started connecting the dots. And I literally, this whole process, I feel like comes about because I have a friend who's an adoptee who is in reunion and who has made her own discoveries and is sending me things. And I'm starting to come out of the proverbial fog.
Yes.
And
I think that when you first had your initial mini reunion, that was a moment there for me as well, just witnessing it. Again, the leapfrogging thing, when I reunited, I mean, it was really at that point, and then moving on where I came out of the fog too, which is interesting to think about, because I definitely was thinking about all kinds of things as we do throughout my life, but I've been shocked with fog, that concept, and coming out of it, and how many of us do that when we go through a reunion. So I think when I started to go through a reunion and I started to realize the things about myself that were connected to being adopted, naturally, I wanted to share that with you too, because,
Yeah.
the light bulbs start going off.
The light bulbs start going off. And I'm having this literal like visual thing in my brain right now of like, okay, so 22 years ago, I'm 29 years old. I peek my head through the fog. I meet my birth mother and go, well, that's really weird. I don't want to see any of that. Pop my head back because it was too much for both her and I at that time. Wasn't the right time. And then, you had your own thoughts about it. And you're like, that's too scary. Like, I'm comfortable in this fog. But then when you pop out of the fog, you're like, there's a whole other world. You literally like reach back for me and kind of go, you might want to come this way and just take a look over here. And I'm just like, wow. And so here we are. It's like 2019. And I think I'm linking those 2 years together because I do remember that because of your prodding in like 2017, 2018, we had made some connections with some of my cousins. We couldn't figure out anything. It was like we didn't know what was going on. We're scratching our heads. And then we kind of give up. And then there was someone who wrote back who identified she was the mother of someone who ended up being the mother of the daughter of my first cousin, whatever. All right, let's not get too technical. But at that point, by the time she writes me back, I'm in support groups. And so I'm kind of like, maybe I should really reach out to this person. And you're like, yeah, do it. Because I'm like, it might be a first cousin. And so anyway, without your prodding, I had some fear too. Like, do I really want to go down this rabbit hole? Do I want to even know this birth father? My birth mother, wasn't clear on it. And it wasn't, I was afraid there was some horrible story behind it. And I wasn't sure what to expect. So, but you were there supporting me and encouraging me. So therefore, I made more effort with this potential first cousin match. And by 2019, he tested, came back a first cousin. And so that puts us at like October or August 2019. At this point, you now become not just my like close friend, but I feel like we are now embarked on this really amazing genealogy detective adventure, which requires massive amounts of texting back and forth, massive amounts of podcast binge listening of Cut Off Gene's podcast on how to do all this stuff, arguments about what a second cousin means versus a cousin once removed.
Still can't get it. I have my own way. You have your way.
I know. You would be like, the way you would describe things, you talk about grandparents. I'm like, stop talking about the grandparents. I want to talk about it this way. Anyway, but we would spend hours, and you became the tree building goddess. And literally, your skill sets of sleuthing and tenacity, I mean, I think we both have that, but like, it was amazing what you did. I just have to say, because I would like get back up in the morning and you would have built out an entire line of people in a way. I was just like, what is going on? I mean, your time zone, you're later than me, but still.
Yeah. I think I'm doing one now with I'm volunteering for somebody, and I feel like two brains are better than one as well.
Yeah.
Like, I think you and I really work together well.
Yeah.
And it's true. You visualize things differently. People look at things differently. The genealogy is it's kind of simple and yet hellaciously complicated as well. So I think the two people kind of working at it really, because oftentimes you would say, now, wait a minute.
Yep.
These, you would say something technically about it that I hadn't seen because I was kind of deep in, or vice versa.
Or one of us would have just listened to an episode on the podcast about some specific technique. And then we would say, actually, now that you bring that up, I just heard this. And so anyway, it was a whirlwind. I mean, I just remember from like October to February or whatever, it was like a 4 or 5 month period that we were like on the case. And, then we were in the wrong family and then some other things happened and just, it's a crazy story. But I think I mean, I'm very grateful, obviously, because we did it, and I couldn't have done it without you. But really, thinking about you, I felt like you really had this skill and this bug and this thing about genetic genealogy or just genealogy. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so captivating for you, or do you have a sense of like what kept you in this? I mean, yes, you knew me, but tell me about that.
Yeah, I guess it's such a combination because I mean, it definitely has to do with the fact that we are so connected and we go way back. And so I had this drive, I think, just to figure that out. I think there's a parallel between the sort of the trepidation about finding your birth father that is parallel to all of us finding a birth parent. It was like in real time. I didn't have a specific reason to fear finding my birth parents, but I did. And I think, as you and I kind of crept forward and you kind of felt it out, we decided to go for it, which is what we all do when we seek the birth parents. So do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, I mean, honestly, some of it's in some sense selfish because I think through your project, I was working through my feelings and we were kind of inching along and then we, which is a whole nother story, but then we came into sort of some wonderful revelations about where you came from. And so
yeah,
it was a positive, that was a positive conclusion. I think genetic genealogy for me, like I said before, it's probably partly fascinating just because it gives us the power to seek answers, find answers on our own, completely on our own. I mean, even now, when you text someone or message someone on Ancestry, mostly they never respond. Well, it doesn't matter because I've been able to sleuth out those people regardless often, so
yep.
It's just a way of taking that control into our own hands. I mean, it's not, it's all sort of on the computer building trees and doing things. So it's not going to break any confidences for people. This is just out there. It's science. It's and it's available now. So it's
a huge tool for adoptees.
Yeah.
It's like huge.
So I think it does. And then, and it's also just, it's a mystery. They're puzzles.
Yeah.
And they're really fun. So if you could do a puzzle and then, connecting to your interests, which I share, it's just being able to kind of travel to these different areas of the world is wonderful and it's fun and it's just interesting. I mean, each of the sort of little groups that I've worked with have their own story. And so I love doing that too. It's just really fascinating to learn about all these different little facts and histories and so on.
Yeah. There's so many favorite moments. I mean, again, we're not going to tell the whole story here. I'm going to write a book hopefully someday, but I will say that as you were just sharing that, I was thinking about, number one, how helpful it is too, to have someone like you helping. So, I know you've been helping some other people now, and I know there's search angels out there and there's people for hire, people not for hire, who just want to do it. Like it was such a great experience to have, again, two brains, but also just someone to share in it with, like, and then the fact that we were friends and all that. But some of the highlights were the moment that you said we were onto something, and you went back to all your trees, and you were like, "Ooh, I did find that name in this tree," and then you were like, "Okay, Lisette, you need to get to your computer and you need to sit down because I found the mother of the person we were looking for." And so I do that in that moment of just like looking at a woman who looks like me. And that you had actually found that photo and then you had uploaded it into her place in the tree. And later that turned out to be my biological grandmother. Like that was the first time I'd ever seen somebody. Because at this point I had never seen, well, that's not true. I did see a photo of my birth mother. But on my Black side, it was definitely the first time I'd seen someone. And it was shocking to me how much I look like her.
Yeah, yeah.
And you had known me my whole life. And so for you, you knew it. You saw it too right away. You were like, oh my gosh. And so that was an amazing moment. And then other funny moments for me are the moments like things like when we were accidentally bringing another person into this family with me. Some NPE, some not parent expected in there. And one of them was one of my matches. And so anyway, we were up late at night on Facebook looking at a bunch of men going, which one is this guy's dad? Like just these funny moments of just like, again, sleuthing, trying to understand. And it's just addictive. I mean, what can I say? It's like you can't stop.
It's totally addictive. And what about this? What about the fact? Now, I always tell people this, and then I always kind of say, but realize what I'm saying. Just the fact that, okay, you and I, you take two people, our adoptive parents aren't from Seattle. My birth parents weren't from the area. You and I both have Irish roots. Donegal, I believe, maybe even.
Yes.
We also have Southern Italian roots.
Yes, we do.
And now, of course, yes, there are many stories of immigrants. Yes, this isn't. But really imagine it. Imagine like how magical that is to me.
I know.
You have all of these connections. Anyway, the stories go on and on.
Which is why we're going to have to travel to those places together. But anyway, yes. And so, there were so many amazing moments. And I still just feel so grateful to you for helping me find my birth father. Wow. And it has worked out really. In this case, our reunion's been really good. And so
thank goodness.
You're actually famous. You're famous in the family. I want you to remember that every time I talk to them, pretty much almost every time they ask how you're doing, you're like part of the family now. So, it's just been a remarkable adventure. So are you still thinking of, you are helping someone else now? I mean, is this something that you feel like you want to keep doing? I know it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, but what are you thinking moving forward?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm kind of definitely playing around with the idea. I don't know, that there's a career there because there's so many people who love to do it and they volunteer. But what I'm doing now, because I have the opportunity to do it, is just kind of play around. And so I did found out that somebody was on one of my it's on a support group. She was looking for help, and so I decided I had some time, so I decided to just help her. I mean, there's no commitment or anything. And I actually had gotten an email on Ancestry. Somebody, this is crazy. I mean, this guy is about a sixth cousin of mine, maybe fifth. And I noticed he had emailed my birth father, messaged him on Ancestry. And I saw that because my birth father and I were sharing information. And I wrote this guy back and I said, after my experience with you, I said, well, I might be able to figure out something. So I helped him, and it was that's a whole other story of craziness, because this guy came out of Florida. I ended up, through a weird sequence of events, a little tidbit of information that he had and a little sleuthing, his birth father, who he was looking for, had ended up in Seattle. Like another really bizarre thing.
Yeah, weird.
Very dramatic story.
Yes.
But we figured it out, he and I, and it was like 2 days. I mean, it was just this bizarre thing. Now, my current project is a little different. It may take a very long time, but at least I'm helping her and just really enjoying it. And so who knows? Yeah, who knows where it might lead. I'm just going to keep going. And if it continues to feel like fun, I might try to make something of it. So we'll see.
Well, you do a great job at it. And I will say that, obviously more and more people are joining these big, are testing at these big consumer DNA companies. And it just keeps going. Like, I even got reminded of that, now once I'm in the database, then of course we're getting new matches, other people that didn't know they were part of this family, or, and so there's always little mysteries still kind of popping up. Actually, I haven't told you, but there is another person in my matches I may need to check in with you about. But anyway, so it keeps going. And I understand the feeling of, it's really fun to help somebody too, because I realized a brother on my birth mother's side was also relinquished. And so I ended up very quickly one day. I didn't think it would be quick, but we really quickly traced his lineage back. It was very interesting what happened there. Yeah. Totally shocked him. He didn't realize some things about his ethnicity and stuff like that. So really fascinating work.
Yeah, I think I'm very driven by helping adoptees. I mean, for sure. I mean, I'd like to help anybody. But if I could help an adoptee find any part of their genealogy, I would love to do that. That's definitely what drives me.
It's like literally helping people become whole, because you helped me become whole by encouraging me all these years. And okay,
and me too.
But also that kind of leads me to the final point. We kind of should probably wrap up. But I was thinking about how we continue to support each other, and it's interesting because now that all of that happened, a few years ago, and then being out of the fog, having steeped in so much information, both you and I, from different resources and groups and all kinds of things, and so many conversations with each other, it's almost hard for me to remember what our friendship was about. I mean, I know it was great before, but it feels so much deeper now. But it's also something that I'm so grateful for. I just want to talk a little bit about that, like the support aspect. I mean, yes, support groups, fantastic. Support communities online, excellent. All these resources, fabulous. But I still feel like there's something so great about being able to just text you in particular, because you know the whole story. I know your whole story pretty much. And we're in these varying stages of reunion and revelations and things. And sometimes there's days where it just sucks. Something will come up. Yeah. Some feeling, now that I am out of the fog, some feeling like, oh my God, I am angry. Mm-hmm. I'm really angry. Like I had my first adoptee anger moment, like genuine one. And I think I called you right away. Like it was like, I could tear somebody's head off right now. And I knew you would understand. So I just kind of wanted to end with that whole discussion of just this gift of having close adoptee friends.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it's like anything. I mean, if you have somebody who knows who has your unique quality or circumstance or whatever, somebody who's in that same thing, I think can really, I mean, that can bring you so much support. And I do feel like a lot of adoptees, unfortunately, are alone, or even if they have some friends who are adopted or family members, they may not have good friends who are. And so that's absolutely so invaluable, especially when, sometimes we can't talk to our parents, our adoptive parents, about things, or other people in our lives who are important to us. Maybe people are they're going to tolerate only a certain amount of anything, right? So I think you and I, and one area where, one of many areas where you have really helped me is around the getting help for, the therapy, just the inner work. I think you are so far ahead of me in pursuing those kinds of things that has been really helpful for me, where I really neglected to really pay attention to trying to do that for myself. And so I know through this whole process that our relationship has been really important for that too. I mean, we've just shared ideas and resources and support groups and anything, podcasts. So yeah, you're definitely my go-to person for the same reasons. And I feel like that can trickle out. I do have some other family members who are adopted, but people have different interest levels, and they're at different stages. And if you haven't gone through the fog, we keep talking about, you may not be at that place,
right,
where you want to delve in.
Yeah. Well, and that's been cool. Yeah. Just sharing different things. I was kind of chuckling to myself when you said that, because I was like, well, I'm only ahead of you because I was crazy. I was so crazy. I was crazier than you at a young age. So I've been through years of therapy and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I think, maybe we can move into our recommended resources, because I think that dovetails into it. Why don't you go ahead? You go first with your recommended resource, and then I'll go with mine.
So my recommended resource is something that I got from you, and that was IFS therapy, parts therapy. Now, you probably know more about it than I do in a grander sense, but my understanding, it's internal family systems therapy, and then parts therapy. I don't know if that's just a word we use or part of it, but basically when I got into Reunion in 2015, about a month after that, I immediately got into therapy for the first time in my life. I had seen a therapist once or twice before, and that's where I say, I wish I had gone to therapy before, because we all can use the help. But when I got into therapy, I realized, well, first of all, I realized I'm gonna need this. I mean, Reunion was so intense for me, like my whole brain exploded basically. And so I got into therapy and was in therapy for 5 years. I mean, sometimes twice a week. And that was great. It was wonderful. And I would recommend to anybody that they get an adoption competent therapist. And I know it's hard even to get therapy for some people. I'm hoping that with COVID and the pandemic, that online therapy has become easier for people to access. So, I mean, that's number one. But then you were pursuing IFS, parts therapy, and I think had started it. And I was kind of maybe tired of therapy or something. But I remember kind of like, yeah. I mean, it's sort of like when I would push you in something, it would take a while. Well, I was sort of like, yeah, that sounds good. But, again, it was out of pocket too. And so I was sort of thinking. And then one day I was just still upset. And I was talking to you and you said, look, maybe you should try this. And I realized at that point that I needed something else. And so you connected me with a wonderful therapist who I saw, I continue to see, but via Skype. And I have to tell you, this therapy, I think it is powerful, really, really powerful. And I think I've seen her for about 3 months and I just feel so much better. So I would highly recommend that kind of therapy.
And I think you mentioned, or I think we both found, well, and I think it was probably on Adoptees On, there's been, well, that gets into my recommended resource, but there's the IFS directory online, I think is where I found her. And then ultimately you passed that on to you when I was doing my research. But yeah, so so my recommended resource is connected with that as well, because I too have been really, we both started this work kind of at the same time-ish. And I really find IFS extremely helpful at this point in my life with having the reunion that I did a few years ago and some new stuff percolating. So my recommended resource is actually this podcast, Adoptees On, has some great episodes, which is how I heard about IFS.
Yay!
I think I'd actually heard about IFS before I heard about parts therapy. That's how I heard about it years ago. But when I heard, I think it was episode 69 with Marta Isabella Sierra, therapist. I know there's a few different episodes and we'll list them in the show notes, but there are just many really good episodes on this podcast that explain about internal family systems. And that's what got my interest, and it just made sense to me. It was like, but hearing someone talk about it and kind of explaining it demystified it a little bit for me. But as someone who I often would refer to my different parts just sort of naturally, like, oh, that's my addict, or that's my crazy teen self, or whatever, it just spoke to me. It was like, and I also had recognized with, coming out of the fog and sort of understanding that there was this very young part of me that had gone through loss. But I had no way to access her. I was like, I don't remember any of that. So I was just really interested in that. But so.
Well, if you think about the primal wound and, when I got into my reunion, boy, did I access the primal wound. I mean, and it makes sense for babies that are removed or separated from their birth mothers and families, and then to somehow psychologically deal with that. Fast forward, parts therapy really makes sense.
Yep.
When you're and people will have to listen to those episodes to learn more, but it makes all the sense in the world, and I think that's why it's so effective.
So we'll link also the directory in the show notes and all of that. But thank you for bringing that up as a recommended resource. And I'm just so glad you could join me on the show on this new chapter of our interesting adventure that I still feel like you started.
Me too.
But anyway, it's all your fault that I'm here right now as a guest host.
Shoot.
So thank you. But yes, so thank you for coming onto the show and sharing your story with us. And thank you for being such a great friend and for being like, my biggest adoptee supportive person in my life. So thank you, Iana.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I feel like I got to experience today what a lot of you experience when you listen to Adoptees On. Like, I got to eavesdrop in on this special conversation between two adoptee friends, and it was just like, I don't know, I cried. Things are falling apart here, maybe. I don't know. I feel like I'm crying all the time lately. But I loved hearing how their friendship evolved. And even though they've been friends since grade 6, talking about adoptee things didn't really come until adulthood and all the ups and downs there. I really appreciated the conversation. Thank you so much. In the show notes, we'll have links to where you can connect with Lisette and find out more about her future projects. And then I also wanted to let you know that, well, this may come off as bragging, but I am so fortunate now to also have adoptee friends in my life. And it has been such a huge gift to me to be able to just pick up and not have to explain the adoptee stuff and just like pick up where you left off and have support when you need it. And I really was trying to figure out how I can do that and how I can build community that does that helps you find adoptee friends. So just timing of this episode is really cool because if you're listening when this is released, we are actually having an Adoptees Off Script party, which is for Patreon supporters. We have them every other month. And it's a live Zoom call with one of my friends who is an adoptee therapist, Pam Cordano. She's been on the show many times. And her and I come up with a few curated questions. We break out into small groups and we just get to chat and connect with other adoptees. And I keep calling it kind of like friendship matchmaking because the hope is that you would come away from that group having made at least one or two connections with fellow adoptees that you can take, I'm going to say offline, but like private to the DMs. You know, maybe you don't live in the same city, but you can build friendships online. I mean, I very well know you can build those friendships online. So if you were listening and like feeling a little bit envious of Iana and Lisette, this might be a way that you can find an adoptee friend. I don't know. If you would love to support the podcast and keep this work going, you can go to adopteeson.com/community and find out how to support the show and how to join us for that off-script party, which is March 12th, our next one. And then if you miss that one, we'll have another one in a couple months. So thank you so much, Lisette and Iana, for sharing your story. Thank you for listening. And next week, we'll be back. I'll be interviewing a really amazing adoptee that I can't wait to introduce you to. And then you'll hear again from Lisette in another few weeks, interviewing another awesome adoptee that we can't wait to introduce you to. So that's the new pattern. You'll hear from me a couple weeks doing interviews, and then you'll hear from Lisette every few weeks. Thank you for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.